Today we have the honor of hearing from Steve Nolte. He not only descends from the Nolte family, which is a long-time family, but also from the Pritz family, which came in 1882. So he has deep lineage in two different families. And with that, I'll let Steve take over.
I actually had lineage in more than that. The Sefton family came in 1883. Yeah. That's my grandma's two grandparents. They both homesteaded. One over by Glen Echo, right across the street. That was him. That was the Seftons. He had 4 daughters, so they're all buried all over the cemetery in Nooksack. Not by him, but at all. Because I went to look for it. I went, all right, where's everybody? Oh, there's one of them. And then the Pritz that came out in 1882 with the Bergs, right? Same year?
No, they came the year before.
Oh, they came year. Oh, the Bergs came before?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Mrs.
Okay.
Pritz was a Berg.
Oh, I know she was.
And she talked the rest of them and coming the next year.
Oh, okay.
So we're related. Unfortunately, he may think so, but...
Fourth cousin, once removed, whatever you want to...
His dad was in the cow breeding business, so I bought one of my registered Holstein heifers from him. So we go back.
And actually, my great-grandpa bought that farm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Noltes came to Washington about 1870 from Ontario, where they had lived for almost 10 years. My great-great-grandpa, this is him here.
You
can hold it.
Let me zoom in a little bit here.
That's Frederick Wilhelm Nolte. Came with his family. I don't know anything about his family in 1855. I love the little census things because the 1900 census tells me when they immigrated. Otherwise, I wouldn't know.
And where'd they immigrate from?
From Germany, and his wife came from All Saints, Lorraine.
Ah.
And they met over here in Michigan, Detroit, Michigan. That's where they got married in 1860. And then soon after that, they moved to Bruce Mines, Ontario, where my great-grandpa was born in 1862. And then his younger brother, Charles, was born in 1869. And about a year later, they moved to Oregon for looks like only a few months. And then they went to Kalama on the Washington side. And from what I've heard, they ran wood up to Columbia down to Seattle. But that's what my cousin says. I haven't found any research.
He went by boat then?
Well, that's what I don't know how they got there. That's what I've always wondered if they took a...
What year was that?
1870. They could have taken the train if they went down far enough south. Right?
Kalama had a train from Kalama to Olympia.
Okay, so maybe
and
that's
I don't
how
know
they got
how
there.
early that was. I know it was there in '83, but I don't know.
But they were there by 1870, 71.
So most people went up by boat.
That's what I figured, because he did go to California for a little bit and then came back up. Now, the family was there until about early 1880s. My great-grandpa, we find him up in 1883, helping my other side of the families, my great-great-grandparents' daughters, and met them at the boat and took them out to the homestead. So that's where he shows up on the scene. But we know he was in Kalama before that. How early he was here, I don't know. I looked at his obituary online. It says he was here in 1893. By 1893, he had been married and already had a son and maybe another son by then. But when he came, he met my great-grandma, who had recently been divorced from her former husband. They had moved up from California, had a son, my Uncle Bert. He was born in 1882 in Colusa, California. And then but she got divorced from him in 1885, according to the what do you call it, the historical, can't think of the name of it. There's a specific name they have underneath in the Washington State Archives. And it talked about them getting divorced, and she got custody of the son and the property. He'd always been told that his father had died. He left. So, and that's the story I always heard my whole life until I ran across the archive and went, what? So don't always believe all the family stories you hear, because they aren't always true.
That's true.
So, and then he went on somewhere else, and I found him 10 years later he had married somebody else in another state. Thomas did. Interestingly, I ran across the Thomas Murphy, because that was their last name, who lived till 1968. He was 108 years old. I was going, was that his father? No, it wasn't, but he would have outlived him. But it's the same name, so you have to go cross-check and find out. So they were here early. Then his brother came up from Kalama, Charles, and the first thing they did is they opened a butcher shop in Bellingham. And they ran it so well, apparently they opened another one. And then soon after they opened a livery. I don't know what you call it, livery.
Livery stable.
Stable, yep. So, and then early '94, they bought the property I live on from the homesteader, Joe Ritchie. And he bought it to raise workhorses. That was his intent. But he also put cows on there too, because he was one of the earliest members for the Dairymen's Association. And I can't think of the website. There's a site that you can look on. You have to pay a subscription for it, but you can look up all the articles by last names of people and where they lived and the year, all the newspaper articles. So I found a lot of my information online. And I can't remember the name of the site. It's Genealogy Books. No, it wasn't that. It was, anyway, a lot of it I got from that, but a lot of also I got from my father and my grandpa, and I knew all my great uncles except for one. So he was quite the businessman. George was. He got into real estate. He started. Him and his brother ran Mogul Lumber Company, and also Clearbrook Lumber Company. Toad Lake Hill, where that is. My grandpa used to take the heifers up there, because there was 1,000 acres that was owned by my great grandpa.
Where did they take the heifers from?
They took them from the ranch.
They drove them up?
They drove them up the Everson Goshen Road, cross the bridge, somebody would be ahead, close all the gates, open the gate on the bridge, apparently there was a gate there, and drove them across the bridge, across the big dip, and all the way up, and then they would go, once they got to the top, because the top didn't go straight up like it does now, the road went back and forth, and switchbacks up the hill. Then they drove it to the east, about a half a mile, to the edge where the mountain starts coming down, and they went into somebody's farm there, and drove them up the hill. I don't know where they had water. There must have been a spring up there. And so when my dad was young, about 12, he would drive the car up and check on the heifers once a week.
They weren't fenced in or anything?
Doesn't sound like it, no. And my brother and sister remember doing it when they were little. So I don't know when the property passed out. From what I've read, it looks like they lost it for taxes. Probably in the early 60s or late 50s. So all that up there apparently was part of my thing. He was really into real estate. It was just a commodity to him because he had the lumber companies. He would go up to Vancouver a couple times. He had some. Apparently he helped log Vancouver back in the 1890s or 1900s. He sent a couple groups of people up there because he was always going. You could see in the records he would go across to the border. It wasn't much of a thing, and catch the train and go up and check on everything.
They lived at the Holmes place then?
No, he lived in Bellingham.
Lived in Bellingham.
Yeah. Yeah, he did.
Well, by that time they'd have trains too.
Well, that's where he caught the train. That's what he usually did. He would catch the train through Blaine and go up. Yeah, because the train ran right through there. apparently. I don't know how often it went, probably once, a couple times a day.
Right.
Probably not any more than it did now. But anyway, he was very enterprising. He had a couple gravel companies. There was one on Whidbey Island and one on thing. Now his kids were very interesting. His second son, Frederick, named after his father, obviously, was quite the troublemaker, apparently. That's what I've read. He ended up getting caught twice for smoking in the movie theater. And he wouldn't stop, and so he got kicked out and wouldn't leave, and they had to get the sheriff in there to make him leave. And then he got in with some other kids, and apparently he robbed, supposedly, and nobody ever proved if he did or not, he supposedly robbed a gun store and took a valuable gun. And they found it on one of his friends, and so he was implicated in it. So for punishment, he ended up working at his grandpa's gravel pit for a few months.
That's the one on Lummi Island?
I don't know which one, if it was that one or the one on Whidbey. That was the original one, yeah. And then, so, he also owned property on Lummi Island, too, where my grandpa lived, 80 acres, and then another piece to the north, up on the hill, which he both gave to my grandpa. My grandpa ended up with a lot of the land. There was also another piece of property, according to reports, it was up to 1,000 acres. I don't know if it was that much, at Birch Bay. And I have pictures, and I couldn't find them this morning, of my grandpa and my dad swimming right in front of Birch Bay State Park. And apparently they stayed, there was a house there up in the woods there. They stayed in that house. Apparently it was family property well into the 30s. But my cousins don't know who in the family owned it. They just know it was family land. So all the family would go there in the summer and stay. That's where they did their summer vacations.
That was a Nolte.
That was a Nolte, yeah. And I don't know, I'm beginning to think it was probably my great-grandma, because she lived until 1938. So when she died, it might have got dispersed. I don't know. But that's what the story goes. Now the Noltes weren't the real first ones either in my family to come to Washington State. Believe it or not, my great-great-great-grandfather, Artius Whitcomb, settled in Blaine in 1870, the first white family in Blaine. Apparently, I looked up in the genealogy books because it had his name there. I'm going to find out about his family. Well, his family all his ancestors fought in the Revolutionary War, about 30 of them.
Which side?
Oh, they were all on the U.S. side.
Union side?
Yeah, from the Revolutionary side, yeah. A lot of them fought in the Civil War, but that's a different story. In fact, most of our ancestors probably have somebody, you probably have somebody in your family that fought in the Civil War. Yeah, so, but anyway, all it said in the book, I was like, okay, great. Married and went west. And I went, great. Apparently, he left when he was 26 years old, got married. He was born in 1801. Before Thomas Jefferson had started to be his first term as president, he'd left. 1801 he was born. And so he left in 1827 for Pennsylvania. They were in New Hampshire. The whole family was there. They arrived in 1630, and been there for a couple hundred years. They weren't about to go anywhere apparently, but he decided he got itchy feet and took off for Pennsylvania for a few years, and then he went up to Wisconsin, and then he went down, and this is all in ox cart. Went down to Iowa and Kansas for a few years. That's where I found him in the census in 1850. By 1860, he had worked his way up to South Dakota, North Dakota, and then back down to Colorado. So he was in western Colorado for a while. Then he went to Arizona with his Now in western Colorado, his oldest daughter, my great-great-grandma, had married, I can't think of his name, Preston Hotchkiss, another early settler family in New England. They were
What kind of work? Just farming then?
Yeah, I think he was just a farmer. I haven't found anything else. There's
looking for good land and
looking for good land, looking for Shangri-La. I don't know what drove him and his family to do that. She settled down there and raised her family, and that's where my mother was born, in Montrose, and they were all in that area. There's actually a town called Hotchkiss in the area. Yeah.
Beautiful place, Hotchkiss.
Yeah. And so that's where a good chunk of the family are still there, you know. And but he continued on to Arizona and lived there for a while. And then his son and another guy were hauling some corn, and they had a bunch of corn they had harvested, and they were going to take back to sell. And they were waiting for the army, the cavalry, to do it. But they had been drinking, and they weren't about to show up, and so they said, well, let's just chance it. So they took off to go back, and they got ambushed by the Indians, and the Indians shot Josiah, got him in the heart, fell over, and the other guy drove on off and made it back to the thing, but by the time he got there, he was dead. So apparently he was heartbroken. Of course he would be. He's probably buried in Arizona. I don't know where. And they took the ox cart and went to California, got on the boat, went up to Seattle, and went to Blaine. That was in 1867 that happened, and they got to Blaine by 1870.
Excuse me. Sir.
Yes.
I may be hearing this wrong, but are you saying they had a car or a cart?
A cart, ox cart.
Oh,
A wagon, ox
that's
wagon.
how they travelled in those days.
Yeah, they
They
were
didn't have horses. They used cows.
They used cows.
Oh.
They had
haul their-
horses. They had horses to most, for short trips. But when it was a long haul trip, they always used oxen.
Wow.
It's slower but steadier, and they could pull a lot more weight.
They have much bigger ankles too, and they can take a lot more punishment than a horse can.
Yeah. Do you remember the ox that were at the fair a few years back?
Yeah.
The guy had raised them. Apparently, an ox basically is just as a bull, and they grow them until they're 2 years old, and then they neuter them, and then they continue on growing. They continue to grow the rest of their life. These things were over 6'5" feet. They were way taller than me. Very gentle animals.
Around here, they used the Holsteins, a lot of Holstein bulls, which is the
Holstein
biggest
bulls.
breed they had at the time. So most of the oxen were Holstein steers.
Now, Spencer, you probably remember some when you were a kid. Some
I
of
don't remember ever seeing any oxen around here.
Okay, yeah.
No.
This guy
No.
had raised them. I don't know.
No, I don't remember seeing any.
Yeah, I know.
Is the
'Cause-
proper name bovine for a cow or an ox or whatever? Bovine? Bovine, is that the proper name?
well,
Yeah.
bovine's the classification, scientific classification for.
They used other
cow.
breeds too. In the Midwest, they used a lot of the Longhorns, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
some of those oxen had
Yeah,
really
some of the
long-
that's right. You see the pictures of them.
Yeah.
They had the big long horns.
So,
So,
a Holstein can get pretty long horns too.
oh, they
don't
can.
want
Yeah,
'em.
yeah, they can.
So,
Yeah, I mean, we had a few that.
but anyhow, what you hear him saying is that you didn't have easy transportation in those days because
No,
you
he
didn't
traveled-
have any super highways either. You were
No.
driving them
So he
cross
traveled for
country.
44 years.
44 years.
44 years off and on. He traveled all over the U.S.
My question is always why.
That I don't know.
And
I know he
why
was.
did he come from California to
He-
Blaine?
He didn't want to. He didn't want to be anywhere close to Arizona, from what I can tell.
Well, Blaine's about as far as you can get away in the United States.
I know it was. And there was just a couple other guys living in the area close to Semiahmoo, and he settled there. And I haven't been able to find his homestead plot yet. He's buried up on the hill just above Blaine,
Yeah.
along with his wife. She lived another 10 years after he died, so she was almost 90. He was 89 when he died. He was 69 years old when he arrived in Blaine. Lived another 20 years. They built the cabin, and his daughter, that was still there, got married, and his surviving daughter-in-law and kids there, and so the Holzheimers are part of that clan, and some of the other Boblets is another family name there.
Yeah, Whitcomb's an old name in Blaine.
Yeah, oh yeah, so my family was really early, and the Hotchkins that married into it was another early family. They came.
So how did the Whitcombs get involved with the Noltes?
Well, that's an interesting story. My mother is a granddaughter of his daughter. So, and they stayed in.
So your mother was from the Whitcomb family.
She was from the Whitcomb family and the Hotchkiss family.
Yeah,
her
from Blaine.
Yep, and they married in Colorado, and they were raised there. And so she came out from Colorado to Eureka, California, and then she her father was restless too, so they moved to North Bend and ran service stations and boarding houses. She said she learned her math actually from the guy who one of the surveyors for the Snoqualmie Pass. He taught her the algebra back in the 20s.
Which family name went to Blaine?
The Whitcombs.
Whitcomb. And what year was that?
1870.
Okay.
Yeah, they were the first white family, apparently. Family, not white people, because there are a couple guys there, but the whole family came.
Excuse me again. When you keep saying the first white people in that, is that opposed to the only people that were here with the native Indians?
That's right.
I see.
Yeah.
So the Indian tribes were here long before.
They were here for a few thousand years.
Wow.
Yeah. Probably up to the Ice Age and maybe before. They don't know really well here because the stuff doesn't get preserved. I found evidence of it on my property too, of it, Indian occupation. Yeah. Yeah, lots of people have, found stuff in their backyards and stuff, depending where you lived. I live on a high spot and close to the water, so they would have had temporary camps there.
Well, you're kind of close to the natural cross, the original crossing?
Yes, I am.
Of the trail?
Just down the road,
Which
yeah.
which is not our bridge?
No, it was
Crossing.
the crossing,
Correct.
yeah.
Ferry.
Right.
Ferry.
The ferry
So,
crossing, yeah.
That's a crossing that
That's
the
where the-
tribes established, that crossing.
Yes, they did,
So
yeah.
it would make sense you'd have a lot of, wasn't a year-round village, though.
No,
But it was
I don't think
common
so.
seasonal, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
they were seasonal. Yeah, and they weren't real big things. The Nooksacks were several little groups of people. They weren't they didn't all live together, except in the summer they would come together for their stuff. And they actually intermarried with the Chehalis. And you'll find a lot of the men will have married a Chehalis woman. And sometimes the kids were raised up here, even though their mother was living in Chehalis. Some of the kids I grew up with, that's the way it was. They were raised by their auntie, not by their mother. It's kind of, I always scratch my head at that, going, wow, okay. But that's,
Indians had a little bit different idea of family.
Yeah.
yeah, probably a larger grouping of people.
It's community.
Yeah, it was more
Yeah.
of a community type thing, Probably what it was with our families when they were growing up, because all your cousins, they didn't differentiate.
Well, they lived in a longhouse.
They did.
We never lived in longhouses.
No, we didn't live in log houses. We live in little log
If
houses.
you've ever been to the British Museum in Canada, you know what a longhouse looks like. And
Yeah, I've been
basically, it's a long building with 2 or 3 fires in the middle of it, and the smoke goes out through the ceiling, and there's no sanitation of any kind inside,
No.
and that's the way they lived all winter in that one building. So,
Are you talking about the tribal people?
No,
Oh.
the Indians,
Yeah,
the native
Indian.
people, yeah.
What?
and their
Used to be
primary
tribes
diet
that
was
way.
fish.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the
Fish and
Nooksacks.
berries.
And they dug up a few roots too.
So,
But anyway, so the Whitcombs were there really early on, and we didn't realize the connection until my great uncle started doing the history, because he grew up in Colorado, and he found out, well, wait a second, my grandpa, where did he end up at? Well, he was in Blaine. This is before the internet, so he's the one that trace the lineage all the way back to the Revolutionary War and before. You know, both Hotchkiss and Whitcombs go back to that, fought the Revolutionary War. Apparently one of them fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill. So,
Okay, let's go back to the Noltes
back
now.
to the Noltes. Okay, so they worked a lot in the...
Now, they had, were there different ones had different business, or they all have it all together in all
No,
of them?
because George's oldest son, George Victor, who was named after Victor Roeder, because they co-founded Bellingham National Bank together.
Right.
George and Charles and Victor and a couple other guys co-founded the bank.
When was the bank founded?
You know, I don't know. I haven't figured. I'm sure that I could look it up, but I've never really looked it up. It was back in the, I think, the late 1890s. So
Yeah.
by that time, he had apparently established enough reputation to warrant that, because he's just started out as the local butcher up on Holly Street, up, you know, where the co-op is. Across the street is where they had their first butcher shop. There are a couple different streets up there, because the directories, if you've ever looked at them before, the public library in Bellingham, they have city directories. You can look up a person's name. They'll not only tell where they lived, but where their business was and what businesses they had. It's actually quite amazing what you can find out. I was pleasantly surprised, because been tracing where he moved, because he didn't, you know, he didn't end up in this house. I knew where he lived at, but later on.
Where did he keep his horses when he had the livery stable? Did he keep them on the home place there? And
I think that's where he raised them, and then he'd bring them up here when they needed more people, you know, wanted to sell them.
most of the livery stables in Bellingham had service out to the crossing.
They must have, because I know
That would be, there must
I
be.
have pictures of him leading horses around the farm.
So there must have been a stable on this end.
Yeah, we had a stable in the old barn.
There was one up on Central Road, I know, that,
In fact, we still have. If you've ever seen the Linden Parade, the Surrey with the fringe on top, that was our Surrey. My great-grandpa drove it in there sometime in the teens, left it in the shed, and it sat there for the next 50 years. And then Fred Polander came by and said, "Hey, I'll fix it up for you and bring it back." Well, he fixed it up all right, but it never came back.
So it's in the Linden Museum.
It's in the Linden Museum, and I actually talked to the guy and had an interview my dad, because my dad had never ridden in it, even though it had always been on our property. We had never driven it, you know. We didn't have horses for a while. We did when I was younger, but so.
now, did they use that in the trips from Bellingham out, or
Yes.
was it just used in Bellingham?
No, that I don't know.
The road wasn't very good between
The
Bellingham.
road wasn't very good. In fact, I know in 1920, when my grandma and my dad was just born, so he was like 5 or 6 months old, they went up to check on the heifers. And one of the heifers apparently had a cow, so I gave it to my grandma, put her in the car with my dad, there's no seat belts, and sent her home. Well, she went to go drive home, and I don't know how she ended up there, but she ended up going down to Guy Meridian. And I don't know if it was a wooden, then probably was.
Mhm.
And she ended up in the ditch. Calf fell out, and so somebody came along and helped her get the car out and calf back in, and they helped her get home. She was a notoriously bad driver. I remember riding with her on Lummi Island. Luckily, there wasn't very much traffic, because she'd look and she'd be over on the other side of the road. "Grandma!" And she'd swing back over. Oh my, she was quite the character, though. In fact, that's one of the things I want to talk about. Well, we'll show the other pictures here too. This is my great grandpa and his wife. That's Clara. Used to be what it says on the back,
Dunlap.
Dunlap, and that was her maiden name, and then George Nolte. Now Clara was born in Iowa. Her father fought in the Civil War, and then she married Thomas Murphy, and they traveled to California. Yeah, go ahead and show that one if you want. That's George's oldest daughter, Winifred. She had trained to become a nurse, and she was like 18 in this picture. Soon after this, she got some type of infection. It sounded like she got hurt, got a deep cut, and it didn't heal, and she died from the infection 6 months later.
What is she carrying?
Huh?
What is she carrying?
She's carrying medical equipment. She was training to be a nurse. They look like little surgical instruments is what they look like.
Yeah.
And what year would that be about?
That'd be 1915.
Yeah.
Infections are bad things.
They were back then, they were.
They still
No
are.
penicillin.
Still, yeah, no penicillin. My dad remembers when it first got developed. One of the early vets learned how to make it himself.
My wife's sister got flesh-eating infection after surgery,
Oh,
abdominal
really?
surgery. It killed her,
Yeah?
and that was only 10 years ago.
Oh, really? Yeah, well, the flesh-eating stuff now. And that's Clara. That's the youngest. My grandpa's youngest sister.
Dark
She
hair.
she was born in 1901. She died in 1999. So she lived till she was like 99 years old. That's a picture of my grandpa and his younger brother, Edward. Ed died in 1990, and my grandpa died in 1982.
They were the ones involved in the bank.
They were ones that enrolled in the bank, yes. And that's that's Clara and Edward, the two youngest of the Noltes. They were quite wealthy, so they had lots of pictures. Yeah, go ahead and show that one.
This is the marriage certificate.
Now here's the story that's kind of funny. This is the marriage certificate of my grandpa and grandma, January 22nd, 1918. So my grandma met my grandpa in Bellingham. She ended up going to school. She lived in Nooksack until her father hurt himself, about 1906, and then they moved into Bellingham for about 10 years. And she ended up going to Whitcomb, what is now Whitcomb Middle School, what was Bellingham High School at the time. And met Clara, who we saw the picture of, in school, and became friends. And so she'd go over to Clara's house to visit. And then when it got later at night, George would walk her home. You know, this went on for, months, several months, until one night George said, I've got a lot of work to do. I'm sure it's a setup. And would it be all right if Ernie walked you home? She was like 15 or 16 at the time. Quite the looker. In fact, here's a picture of her soon after she was married. That's my dad.
I remember.
So anyways, so he walked her home that night, and all of a sudden they became real good friends. And then soon after, he graduated in 1916. By 1917, he was living out on the farm, and she was back in Nooksack in another house, up on Breckenridge Road still. And so he would court her, going back and forth. One night, apparently, it was a little dark, and he almost ended up falling in the river, because along the Nolte Road wasn't much of a road back then. It was more of a track. And so he almost lost himself coming into the thing, because it was starting to flood, and he was almost lost. Didn't make it back home, but he did. So anyway, they decided sometime, this is 1918, January 20th, they went in to see his dad. They were in town shopping or doing something, and so they went to see his dad and see how he was doing, and in his office. So how you do? And so they come into the office, and he says, so how you young lovebirds doing? get your license yet? No, we haven't decided yet, you know. Maybe we'll get it pretty soon, you know, your marriage license. And so he went, oh, well, let's go get it done. So he went, well, okay, I guess so. He was a man of action. So they went and got the license that day, and he said, well, now we got the license, let's get you hitched. And he went, well, I don't know about that. Oh, yeah, no. And so he went and got Clara out of school. What are you going to be out of school for? So they came and said, well, let's go out and get you married. So Grandma went, I don't know what to do about that. You know, talking to Grandpa. But they went along with it, and so they went out to Nooksack, and they found the minister and in the office, I guess, and then they went to her folks' place, and she said, let me go in first. So they went in. She went into the house and said, hi, Mom. We're thinking about getting married today. And she went, what? Oh, but I already got the dress ready. But I thought you wanted to really get your wedding. Well, it's okay to have a small one. So her mother reluctantly agreed, apparently. And then she said, George says to tell your sister hi. And I can't remember which one it was. It was Jessie or one of them. Hi. She went, well, what's that about? Well, I know what it's about now because you told me. He had met her when he was taking her out to the homestead because it was Lou's sister, and he had taken a fancy to her and that was when it was from. So it's just funny how that comes around. So they got married, and that day, and my grandma tells it, it's hilarious. And what happened is that he said, okay, I arranged for you to take a boat to Seattle for your honeymoon, and with just a little trick. So later on that afternoon, they get back into Bellingham, and they get on the boat. They get on the boat, and so yeah, do you have the room reserved for Nolte? For George Nolte. Oh, no, that one's taken, but we have another room for you here. And so he went, huh? So he, gets in the room, and it's bunk beds. And it's an overnight boat to Seattle. So they get to Seattle, and lo and behold, his older brother, George, who was in on the trek, knocks on, come on, you lovers, I'll take you out to breakfast. And he just about clocked his brother, he said. He was so mad. But that's apparently my great-grandpa's sense of humor. He got in with his oldest son and set him up to go to Seattle for him. And he took the suite, the big fancy bed in the whole room.
I noticed that his dad and her mom signed as witnesses.
Yeah.
Sounded like a shotgun wedding almost.
Almost. Yeah, you could almost say that was, because they got the license that day and then traveled out to Nooksack. I mean, that's no small undertaking in 1918,
Yeah, you didn't walk to very far.
So I don't know if they took the car. They must have taken a car out there down the
Probably
guide.
took a train.
Yeah, I don't know.
Train.
I always wondered how they got to Everson and Trevilian back and forth in one day, back then.
It was kind of tough.
It would be kind of tough.
I know Mom used to always take a train when she went to town.
Yeah, from
Bellingham.
Nooksack. The
Yeah.
Nooksack would go back to
Everson,
Bellingham.
Nooksack, yeah.
Yeah. No, the one in Everson went to Bellingham. The one in Nooksack went to Cedar Woolley, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, she walked down to Everson
Right. I figured that's what.
and then go to Bellingham.
Yeah. So I don't know how they got out there.
But it took all day. She'd leave at 8 in the morning and she wouldn't
Yeah.
get to her aunt's place on Hillsdale Road until 4 in the afternoon.
Exactly. Yeah.
So to go make a round trip in one day was nearly impossible.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Unless you're on a horse.
Well, yeah. I don't know if they rode out there.
A
They
horse
took-
could do it.
They took Clara out, and my grandma's older sister was still in town. They didn't get a hold of her, and she never let my grandma forget that she wasn't at her wedding. She was
We
really,
used to have what's called a gas car. What years did that gas car start running these tracks?
that I don't know.
Well, the ones, Mom just said they had a morning and an evening train.
Yeah, so if they came out,
She'd go in the morning and the next day she'd take the evening train back.
I mean, for them to even be in town, they'd come into town earlier in the day, so I don't know when they were at the office. It must be in
Yeah,
the
the
morning.
morning train went in at 9,
Yeah,
so it'd be about town 9:30 to 10 o'clock.
right. So they decided to go see him, and yeah, he instigated all this.
Now, you mentioned the Seftons.
Yeah, he lived there, and he lived till 1925. He raised ponies. Now, he was almost an invalid for like 10 years, and then slowly recovered and was back to moving around again before he died. And he fought in the for the Illinois regiment in the Civil War in Union side. And the rest of the Seftons are still down south. I've got a letter at home written to my great-grandma asking about, so where's the rest of the family and who's doing what? And they were talking about some of the rest of the family. This was written in the 1920s. Now, the Fritzes came from, actually from Minnesota.
Right.
That's where they, but the rest of the family, it was in Pennsylvania. And in 1923, my great-grandpa and his wife drove down to Pennsylvania. But they had to go south to California and then across that way and then back up. So then he went to find his cousins up in the woods, and he was looking around for him, calling for him, and apparently he just about got himself shot because they were moonshiners. They were up in the hills, up in the woods, doing their stuff, and he said, "Why did you let us know you were coming?" "Well, I knew where you were going to be." I mean, it wasn't a, I don't know how, it took him a couple months to get there. I can't imagine the roads. You'd have to go along the coast most of the way to get to California even.
Yeah.
There wasn't much of a road otherwise. Probably along Chuckanut all the way down.
Chuckin was the first road
It was.
that went through, and that was in 21.
Yeah, this is in 1923 or 4, really early on. I was shocked when I read the article.
Yeah, we have grown up on the interstate system, have no idea what it was like prior to that.
I mean, there were a little bit, but not much. They were just coming in when I was 6 years
I
old.
mean, little tiny tires, you change tires every 100 miles or so.
Yeah,
They didn't last very long.
Driving to Seattle was an all-day trip.
yeah.
Yeah.
You had to stop and patch tires periodically.
Oh, you remember doing that then, Spencer?
No, I was before my time.
Yeah,
I heard my folks telling about it.
yeah, well, exactly, yeah. Well, I know
We
that.
look at pictures to tell us what went on in those days.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
Well, wasn't Chuckanut Drive completely blasted out? I mean, it was a blasted out road, right? They did dynamite it? Didn't
Yeah.
it?
Good show.
Yeah, most of the way.
What was that?
Oh, I just wondered how Chuckanut Drive was created, and I thought it was blasted out. It was like dynamited, right?
Chuckanut wasn't paved when it was,
No, but it was blasted out of the side.
But just
side
to make
of
the
the
road
How'd they
itself, they
cut that?
blasted it, right?
Well, before the road, yeah, they ran a trolley down to Seattle. They had a trolley that
had
went
a
from
train.
Dillingham.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
they
go
had a
down
train.
by
It
train.
was
You
on
could go down by
pilings,
train.
in places it was on pilings,
Yeah.
avoiding Chuckanut.
Oh.
Yeah, out on the water, and some of those pilings are still visible.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
that's a
When you
great
go down
one.
there, and then it would come in at the bottom, down at Blanchard, it would come in at the bottom of Chuckanut.
Yep, that's right.
And shoot a diagonal, which is, what is it, Highway 11, isn't that Chuckanut Drive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Highway 11, straight line down
Straight-
to
straight-
Cedro, and then
Yep.
ultimately down to Seattle in the interurban. But that's how people got around Chuckanut. I mean, otherwise, there was no Interstate 90, there was no road, it was
No.
coming up South Fork,
Yeah, because Sammy,
through the valley.
Through the
to
valley, that
park,
way.
to the
Yeah,
lake.
Yeah.
before the
And park
train,
and the lake and up the lake. I mean, that's how people got in
Yeah.
to Whatcom County.
Well, wasn't Chuckanut part of Highway 101? Wasn't it?
No, I don't know.
99.
99.
Was it 99?
there wasn't any Highway
It was
101 yet.
much later. I mean, the road that.
101's
out on the
ocean
much
anyway.
later.
Oh,
They had little pieces of road here and there, and a lot of it wasn't paved at all.
Yeah.
No.
Matter of fact, I have pictures of Snoqualmie Pass when it wasn't paved,
well, did it start
Yeah.
out a trail?
still a gravel road.
Was Chuckanut?
No,
Chuckanut
there was
Drive
no
is now,
no.
was it a
No, there
trail?
wasn't, no. It wasn't
No.
like the telegraph, which was a trail built for the telegraph.
So
you
it
know.
wasn't even an Indian trail for the access to the water?
No,
or-
it's
Not,
sand cliffs,
not as far as we know,
yeah,
because it's just,
sand-
yeah, it's all that
sandstone cliff.
sandstone cliffs all the way along.
Yeah. Road building in Whatcom County was very difficult.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Because of the
Prior to the railroad, the
and-
water was the only way you could
Yeah,
get around. The Indians used water and the white man used water.
yeah, because I know
And
that's
then the
how,
train came in.
That's why
that's how my homesteader, the homesteader Joe Ritchie came up. He was here in 1871, about the same time as Everson. And he would have had to come by canoe unless he bushwhacked in.
Yeah. Or walked.
He could have walked in.
in on the trail.
He could have walked in on the trail. It doesn't say on the thing. In fact, that's, you know, Everson reminds me, my great uncle, Herbert Murphy, we always called him Uncle Bert. He always told us, and whether this is true or not, I don't know, but he always said that he was asked by Everson to be adopted as his nephew.
To be what?
To be adopted as his nephew.
Oh.
Everson asked him, but he said he wasn't ready to settle down, to inherit the land, because Everson didn't have any folk here at all. Even though Baileys are descended from Everson now, but be that as it may, he was apparently asked by that, so,
Well, his nephew was eventually adopted.
yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Got anything else?
Yeah, I have a few things too, because Uncle Bert also worked for his father, his stepfather, herding cattle for a while. I don't know how long he did this, but he would take him over to the Lake Chelan, up through the Skagit River Valley, and up, and then there's a little tiny pass before you get to the big high pass that cuts back into the, I've looked at it on the map, you can cut back in and go into the back of Lake Chelan, the lowland area there.
It's Cascade Pass.
Yeah, I don't know what it's called then.
Cascade.
Yeah, so, but he,
That's a
so,
long way to go.
I know.
So
you-
this is also that they could graze during the
Yeah,
summer? So they
graze for the
didn't have
summer.
to-
Yeah,
Wow.
That is a long way to go.
I know.
There wasn't enough grazing land around?
Yeah, you would think so,
Yeah,
right? I don't,
exactly.
I didn't ever figure that out. And then he did that a couple times, a couple of years apparently. And on the way back from one, he said he found gold. And so he always said he had found this thing of gold in this rock. He said, but then he lost it. So we went, yeah, okay, Uncle Bert, we don't.
Well, there's mines up there.
Oh, there
On the
is.
east
Oh,
side
no.
of Cascade Pass.
No, exactly, yeah.
Horseshoe Basin.
And the other story about him is he worked as a powder man for years, you know, on the log booms and stuff, and apparently he helped clear part of Nooksack, you know, the log jams. Back now I've heard stories.
That's the upper jam between Linden and Nooksack.
Yeah, and then so
Let me stop there. Well, there were two major log jams, one at Ferndale, which was called
Right.
the Taws Jam, and then there was another jam between Linden and Everson. That's why Everson never got boat traffic into Everson,
Right.
because it stopped in Linden because nobody would ever blow the upper jam.
then he was
But
part of that.
they did it eventually.
Yeah, eventually did it, yeah. And then back in the 30s, I don't know when, on the farm, we had basically a giant beaver pond in one of our fields. And I always wondered about it. And then my neighbor said, well, you know, when I was a kid, I had an old man come up to me and said, where's the lake? And he went, what do you mean, where's the lake? He said, well, there was a lake back out pointing to our place. And then a couple of years ago, Bedlington, or one of the guys at the auction barn, had another old guy come up to him and said, hey, where's the lake that I used to fish in when I was going to school? Because the Rotor Screw was up there. And he went, what are you talking about? There's no lake. He said, no, there was a lake there. Apparently, it was a pretty good sized beaver pond. And my great Uncle Bert decided, well, we're gonna make this regular field. So he told all the neighbors down below, you know, I'm gonna blow this beaver dam, so you want to stay out of the way for all the water to drain. Apparently there was one old German down at the old Hickey place that said, yeah, it's not gonna be that bad. And so he ended up on a stump all night long.
At least there was a stump.
At least there was a stump, exactly. He didn't get washed away. But yeah, I'm sure he had a few words with my Uncle Bert, and Uncle Bert probably would have just said, "Well, look, I warned you."
Where did Uncle Bert live?
Uncle Bert lived in King Street in Bellingham.
Oh, so he just came out and
Yeah,
worked.
he came out and helped a lot when I was growing up and before. In fact, he helped my. No, Spencer, do you remember the winter of 1950?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes. So now my dad said it was the early spring year, and in the middle of March is when the.
Well, January, Friday the 13th.
Okay, there you go. See,
The wind was 80 to 90 miles an hour out of the northeast, and the temperature was down around zero.
yeah, my
And
dad.
we'd had about 8 or 10 inches of snow earlier in the week.
Yeah.
We
16.
missed 3 weeks of school that year. They had 20-foot snow drifts up by Sumas. And there was a 2-story house east of Sumas that was buried because there was a big barn north of it.
Oh, caused the
drift.
snowdrift. Yeah.
Buried that house, 2-story house. There was a picture in the Bellingham Herald of the linemen. They walked up the snowdrift warming their hands on the chimney. and Sumas was running out of food and fuel, so they formed a caravan in Bellingham. Came out the Mobbaker Highway to the sand up to the Goshen up to Five Corners, and then north on the Mission,
Wow.
because it didn't drift there.
Right. Yeah. It was,
And we
there was no
saw them,
wind.
we could see the Mission Road, we saw them go, so the next day, I hauled all of our milk cans down there and just set them by the road, because I knew the truck would be by sooner or later.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a rough year.
No, that's what my dad said.
That
You
So,
don't remember 50?
no, it's right before. It was a couple of years before I was born.
The one thing I remember about your father is he put his milk in a watering trough
Yes.
and froze them and stacked them up.
Right. Well.
And then when it was warmed up, he thawed them out and put them back in cans and sold them at factory milk.
Yeah. Well, that year they were actually my dad said everything froze. All the
Yeah.
wells froze. He said they were getting water from the river or from the creek, and he said it was a quarter mile each way, and they had to carry it by hand. He said it was brutal,
And
brutal.
Some of them just fed the milk back.
Yeah. Well, he did that. Eventually, they did that too. That's what he said.
But I remember him stacking up
Yeah. Stacking up the milk.
stacking up milk ice cube, the milk cubes. He had quite a herd in those days, so
Yeah,
he
yeah,
had
fif-
a lot of milk.
Yeah, a little bit of milk. In fact, that leads me to my next story. When I was growing up, I didn't see it happen, but we had the big thing to keep the milk cool in the cans, right? You know, the big water cooler. And I don't know why they were doing out there, but my sister and my brother, who was only like 6 months old, my sister was 2.5, and my other sister was like 5. Well, she was out there with her little brother, so she plopped him in the water trough. And he went spinning around the thing, and my sister caught him on the way by. You know, they were 2 years apart, so a little bit of jealousy, I think, there. I don't know what the deal was.
Child Protective Services would have been out the next day.
Exactly. So they,
We were fortunate, we had 2 sets of milk cans. Most people only had 1 set, they got the set back, but for some
Oh.
reason, because of where we were located.
so how many were in a set?
Well, we had 2, I don't remember, we had a double set, because they didn't bring ours back the same day.
Oh, okay.
We had a set, and Dairygold owned 1 set.
Okay.
But my dad owned one. And you're talking about a relative that was an early member of Dairygold?
That was my grandpa.
Was he a charter member?
He was number 7.
My dad was a charter member of Dairygold,
Yeah,
one of
so,
the original members.
yeah, I think my grandpa was too. He was early,
Sounds like it.
yeah, no, it was either number 7 or number 9 was our
I
number.
never knew what my dad's first number was.
Yeah. Yeah, but we had, because, our big thing was we had registered Holsteins, so, back when nobody else did that. So, in fact, we had our cows registered before Carnation did.
Hmm.
My dad said they hadn't started doing it yet, but we did. They were the first ones in the county,
Oh, yeah.
and then Carnation did it, and then everybody else started doing it. So, yeah, early farm.
4 minutes, Jim.
How about,
4 minutes.
can you tell us about the stump house?
Yes. So the stump house was the house that Joe Ritchie lived in for the first couple winters. I don't think he lived there in the summer, but in the wintertime, that's where they'd hold up and build it's not very big.
You want to explain what a stump house was?
Well, We used to have a picture of it up on the wall, right?
Yeah, it was right there. Yeah, I don't know where, yeah,
What happened to Eileen?
The big cedar
Really?
the big cedar trees were hollow in the center.
yeah,
So
hollow
when
in
they
the center.
cut the main stem off, they had a big hollow space in the
Right.
middle. It could be 10,
And then they put
15 feet.
a little
up
roof
in
over
the
it,
middle,
and they used that
and then
for,
just put a roof on it.
yep, that's what they did. So that's where he spent the first couple winters, 71 and 72, in that stump house, you know, until they could start building the house, you know, and clear the land enough so we could do it.
You got something you can close with now?
Sure.
We're running out of time.
Yep. Let's see.
Well, we can take a break if you want.
No, that's
We gotta
okay.
keep going. We got about 3 minutes.
You have a lot more to say, or
Not a lot.
I'm
I'll
gonna take
just-
a break.
You want to take a break?
Are you out of?
I'm pretty close.
Okay, well, I can just talk about, you know, I can remember growing up, we had a pig that was an old sow, because we had raised pigs, and we had the old metal thing that you'd clean them out with, you know, to get the hide off. Anyway, she got so big that our young bulls were afraid of her. They would stay out. And I remember we didn't have fruit for a couple of years because nobody would dare go into the orchard. And they finally went, okay, we're going to get rid of her. So they killed her. And she dressed out 1,100 pounds.
Whoa,
So she was a big
oh, man.
monster.
500 pounds big.
I know, it was huge.
Black bear size.
It was as tall. My dad said it was almost as tall as the
Yeah.
young bulls. And they
wow.
wouldn't bother her.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, so that's why we didn't have fruit for a couple of years. My dad said, and they finally got tired of it and went, okay, we're going to get rid of this thing. So they,
But it was
Got
good
the-
meat with all that fruit in it.
oh, I don't know, yeah,
She was still producing litters, though.
yeah, apparently, yeah,
There, that stump.
and that's why they kept her. You know, she's probably 10, 11 years old. You know, it's an old pig back then.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Wow.
so yeah, that's. And I told my grandma's wedding day story, which is pretty funny. Oh, I have two stories from my brother and sister, my poor brother and sister. One of the other stories is when they were younger, they got into the quick drying cement, and we're playing with it and stuff, and got the high chair all messed up. And my mom and dad discovered it, and they said we barely got them cleaned up, and they never got to use the high chair anymore. It was all caked and full and wouldn't move anymore. We still have it in the shed. And their hair was all cut up and everything else. And then the last story I'll end with was we used to, you know, go up in the hay mound and make tunnels and stuff. And one day my sister, I don't know what happened, she got mad at my brother, and so she took the pitchfork and tossed it at him.
Oh.
And it landed right between his toes, right through his foot. Didn't hit a tendon, went through the muscle, didn't affect the foot at all. But it stuck out the bottom of the foot. I remember it to this day. You know, off and on. Probably earning enough money to get, okay, let's go check out another place. And I mean, I watched the census record. I went, what the heck is he doing? You know, because you could follow him. You know, every 10 years he'd be in a different spot somewhere else. And
One of the things is most everybody who moved bought land, so they left paper records. Otherwise, wouldn't find them.
yeah,
People nowadays travel, you know, and don't.
because I can't find the paper
They
record.
rent or something, and we don't know anything about them. But
Yeah.
in those days, most everybody they were moving to improve themselves, and then they would record something. They would stay in a place
Right.
long enough to buy a piece or
Yeah, because
put
the
their
notice-
name on a piece of paper that is still intact.
Exactly, because I
That's
don't,
why historians love his paper trails.
because there's no paper trail for the Noltes until they get to northwest, you know, southwest Washington in 1883 when they had the state's census. Before that, there's no paper trail, even though they were there right after the census in 1870.
Steve called me up one day and says, I was looking at my dad's records and it says, 3 Pritts die in river. You know anything about that? And I said, well, yeah, I know about that. And he said, well, I don't know, I never heard that story. And I said, nobody,
That's
my
true.
mother, when I asked my mother and she told me what she told me, she said, you don't want to know. And she said, that's not a story the family tells anybody.
Yeah, that was my great-grandpa's sister.
And, right, and I said, well, I know the exact date. It was such a traumatic event, it must have shown up in the papers.
So you found it in the
And
paper?
so I looked in the papers and I found 7 stories
Wow.
in 3 different papers on that event. And I found out my mother's story was partly accurate. Mother jumped in the river with her 2 boys and they all drowned. But how it happened and all that was a different story. But she had tried to parcel her kids off to the family
Oh, they did. I didn't know
because she
about
said
that.
she wasn't able to take care of them.
That was,
and
that
the
was
family-
1893,
the-
so
and-
the Depression was
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
And the family wouldn't take them, and so she just drug them to the river, and they all went in.
Wow.
That was the end of that.
That was the railroad bridge when it first got put in, right?
1890 it was put in.
Yeah.
That
so-
was, yeah, the mother said they went up on the railroad bridge and jumped off. But the stories in the paper said they could see the tracks through the sand where she drugged the boys. The
Oh,
boys,
yeah,
she
yeah.
drugged one in each arm and to the river. And the
my
boys were
gosh.
found the next day in Everson Slough, right there by the house.
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't find her body for a couple of weeks. Her husband eventually found the body.
I thought he had left.
Well, that's what the story Mom said. He divorced her and left. But it was he who conducted the search and eventually found her body down. She was in the jam
Oh, yeah.
downriver. Then he finally found her body in the jam downriver. But you know, we have no comprehension what it was like to live on the frontier. It was tough. It
was hard
really was tough.
It was really tough.
And people died.
got hurt.
My great uncle Fred, his daughter's buried up here at Nooksack in 1909, and I said, well, how could it be? Because he moved to Idaho in 1909. I found out he buried her in September in Nooksack, and in late September went to Idaho, and 3 years later his son drowned in the creek there. His only son drowned in the river. You know, all of this is,
It just, yeah.
and he almost quit farming and gave up then because his son was 17 and able to pretty well do the farm for him, and he had gone to Idaho because he couldn't take the cold, damp weather anymore. He needed to be a warmer, drier climate, so, but he stayed there. It's interesting, that story's kind of interesting to me because he had, out of his 7 kids, there were only 3 children, 4 children, counting his boy. But 3 of the youngest daughter had 3 children. One of them, who's about 2-3 years older than I am, younger than I am, had 9 children, and she's just had her 52nd grandchild. So he wasn't able to produce many children that produced children. The next generation is going to be very well populated because of Carolyn. And I haven't seen Carolyn for 70 years, so it's been a long time.
Oh,
but
she still lives in Idaho?
I'm still in Idaho. No, she's in Pennsylvania now.
Oh,
Well, she's in Iowa now.
Iowa.
But anyway, these are, and I just got a letter from a Pritz.
Oh, did you?
In Pennsylvania, Vivian, and I still have contact with the Pritz family in Pennsylvania, but she's the last one. And she's an in-law, of course. Her
Yeah.
husband is not doing too well. But anyhow, they're all in their late 80s and 90s now. So when she's gone, she's the only one I can communicate with in Pennsylvania now.
Well, there's probably
But
some
they've been
other-
there since 1750, so.
Yeah, they were. Now, did the Princes fight in the Revolutionary War? That's what I always wondered.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not certain
Because
either. I haven't been able to
Sam
find any
isn't
record.
recognized as a veteran.
No, he wasn't.
So he would be the one that
I
would have
know.
been in the war.
And
It,
then now, did they change their name
Ooh,
from Prince to Pritz?
no, it's always been
It's always been
Pritzes.
Pritz. That's what I thought.
Yeah. Why, I don't know too much about that, except that we were always involved with the Pritzes.
Yeah, the Birds
And
and
the
the
Pritzes
Pritzes.
went west, and to when they came out in '82, the only way to get there was to go to San Francisco and up by boat. Whenever my family came out, or when the family part of the family came out, the Northern Pacific was built in late '83.
Oh, it was, so they came out that way.
They came out through the Northern Pacific.
Because I know I would get off the train and go hunting and then come back on, because the train would travel at 3 miles per hour or something like
Yeah,
that.
and it stopped at night.
Yeah.
You got off at night. That's why they had hotels. That's why if you go across Montana, and every 100 miles,
Train
there's a
station.
town, because
Yeah.
that's
How
where
far
the
they
train
got.
could go.
Yeah.
And then it had to stop overnight, and everybody had to get off, and they had to put a new load of wood on, and all that sort of stuff. Yes, sir.
Back in the late sixties, or by nineteen
So you should
sixty-six,
have kept on doing
67,
it.
I was visiting with with John DeVlois, the old man that back then, because I got married about then, and he wasn't long after that he passed away or so. But he talked about going on a trip to Montana. And when they got to Montana, all they saw was tracks, no road, just
Train tracks.
just tracks on the land, and that's
Oh, yeah.
how they managed to find their way around, was just through the marks on the ground.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was like probably around the turn of the century.
Oh, see, it was, I know, stories like the kids walked to school, and if
Yeah.
a storm would come up and bury the fence posts, the kids could not find their way home,
Yeah,
and they didn't find them till spring.
That's no joke about running a rope from the house to
Oh,
the
no,
barn.
Yeah, that's not a
Every,
That's not
before
joke.
winter,
I was
Yeah.
saying-
so you could.
that's
They
true.
even had that out here,
Yeah, we had that out here
It's
too,
not
yeah.
uncommon.
but in
Yeah.
the Midwest it was, that's brutal. I know my dad said he had one great uncle that came west and homesteaded in 4 different states, but every winter he went back to Pennsylvania. He could not take that continental high wind.
Oh,
He could
yeah.
take the cold because it was equally as cold in Pennsylvania, but when the wind combines with that cold, it is bitter.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, 70, 80,
I think that's
90
why they left
below
Minnesota.
zero.
And America didn't look the same as it does now. I mean,
Oh,
if you
no.
look at the old maps, from the Mississippi to the Rockies, they just wrote in Great American Desert. And there
Yeah.
wasn't any vegetation there. You know, we didn't have
No.
the Ogallala Aquifer.
No.
And so when people were emigrating across the country, the first thing they would do is plant trees. So we
Yeah.
have forests, we have trees, we have communities with old trees in them, all planted by hand.
Well, I
when
mean-
the Scandinavian people came in Northern Europe, you know, they just
That's what
they
they
would
did.
go at the insanity rate was amazing
Oh, I bet.
in moving across the West, because there they were away from community, trying to farm dry soil that may or may not get rain, that had no trees. It's totally different from
Yeah.
everything they've ever known. And they'd like lose their mind quietly in their cabins in the wintertime.
That's why a lot of them came out here
It's
because of that.
amazing. That's right. That's right. And then they get out here where the trees are touching each other.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they're gigantic, and it's a completely different.
Well, you talk about the Midwest. My mom grew up in Nebraska, and she rode her horse to school. And when she was about 8 or 9 years old, she had ridden her horse to school. And the teacher was there. Everybody was getting a little leery because the sky was starting to
He
get
colored.
kind of that snow cast about it and everything. So the teacher, by about 10 o'clock, dismissed the school. And so she started to ride home, but the wind had picked up and the snow had picked up and everything, and she couldn't see. She couldn't orient at all. She was completely confused, and so she would turn her horse one way and turn it another way, and she just wasn't getting back. And this little girl, and she's just a little girl, you know, and she
Wow.
was really frightened. So she just laid her head down on her horse, dropped the reins and laid her head down on the horse and cried. And the next thing she heard was clop, 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 clop. The horse was going into the barn door. She'd probably been turning him away from it forever, you know.
The horse knew his way home.
But it's a good
Wow.
thing she had that horse, because if she had tried to walk home, she might not have made it home like you're
Horse
talking
knew the
about.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she used to tell us that, because she said, well, when you're lost and don't know what to do, trust your horse.
Oh, yeah.
No
That's
kidding.
true. No
Yeah.
kidding.
There's a lot to that.
There's
Yeah,
a
there
lot
is.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But your family history, moving.
They were always
that's
moving.
very common.
It is.
Not everybody's family's restless, but people would move. They're looking for land, they're looking
Yeah.
for a job, or they're looking for a place to practice their experience, whether it's
Exactly.
mining or ranching, farming, whatever. And so you go to places and you move because of your language group, you move because of your faith, what communities are
Yeah.
strong that way, like the Dutch story across America or the German. And so people would move a lot. That's not uncommon at all.
it wasn't,
Searching,
no.
they're just searching
Yeah.
for a place. Even Hovander, Hovander didn't get here until he was 60. And it wasn't a straight line from Sweden. They went to New Zealand, they lived in Santa Monica on the beach, and they eventually came to Seattle, the Hovander family from Ferndale. They came to Seattle, lived right downtown for like 2 or 3 years, and then gold was discovered in Alaska.
Yep.
Seattle went insane.
It did, yes.
And he said, I'm going back to my old family roots and I want to be a farmer. And he was 60 when he built the house in Ferndale.
Really?
He was 70 when he built the barn. I mean, that's, you know,
Yeah,
that was
that's-
not a straight line.
No, exactly.
And he was prosperous.
Most of
I
us
mean,
talk about retiring someplace.
Well, I know,
And
'cause
he
I
had
mean, I
money in
was-
his, he had 6 kids and
My-
money in his
'cause
pocket
my
when he's
great-grand-
doing all of this.
Yeah,
But
'cause-
it's the same story.
Yeah, Whitcomb he was still
Yeah.
traveling. 6 more years. I'm 63. He was still traveling until he's 69.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that. You know,
You're how old?
I'm 63. I know I'm young, Spencer. Yes, I'm young.
Well, I'm 84.
I know.
My great uncle built the nut dryer we have when he was 73.
The what dryer?
73, and I thought,
For hazelnuts.
nut growing was a brand new thing, and his orchard had just started to produce, and so but I thought, 73? I would not be building something new, starting a new adventure that had never been tried before at 73.
Hey, I played church league softball and I'm 20 to 25 years older than the next oldest guy in the whole league.
A lot of people, when they came to Whatcom County, the first thing they did was plant fruit trees.
We have lots of fruit.
And
Fruit
yeah.
trees.
then they wanted to dry the fruit
Yeah.
because that was a quick way to make cash, to sell it to other people
Yeah.
moving through the area,
Sure.
and especially if they were going to Alaska. You know,
True.
that you would sell your dry fruit or mining or whatever else people
I
were
mean,
doing.
you did whatever you could do to make
You
money.
can make
Henry
money
did
and
a
you
lot
could
of fruit
also
processing.
feed yourself because you could
I mean,
dry it. So it's
exactly.
just,
Yeah,
you know, what
because
can you do? Because
fruit
you either
trees
had to
were
take
thing.
the trees down, if you're gonna farm, you had to take the trees down, then what were you gonna do around all those tree stumps until you get, you know,
Oh, exactly.
and then the soil, because it was,
I think my uncle was a
high
little
acid.
more mechanical man. He wanted to save the money of freight. Dry nuts weigh about a third what, and he
Oh,
had to
yeah.
sell them
That's
to
right.
Oregon. Oregon was the buyer of the nuts.
Yeah.
yes, and transportation wasn't fast by any means, so another good reason for
Probably
drying and
shipped.
preserving, yeah,
Right.
Yeah, they would probably ship them and go up to
wherever,
the river.
they could
Yeah,
go
it was
east.
because when we picked them, we had to ship green, and
That's
Yeah.
expensive.
there
It's-
we didn't have the energy. He had a wood stove underneath, a wood stove on the main floor, and it vented out through the top, and the heat just ran up through those things until they were dry, which took about 2 to 3 weeks. And can you imagine stoking a wood stove, 2 wood stoves for 2 or 3 weeks just so you can get the water out of the nuts? We weren't quite that way. We put it in sacks and took it down to the railroad station and let it go bye-bye. We didn't make as much money, but I think sometimes I think like my great uncle, because I don't want to waste a penny on anything. And I know so many people who, well, like one guy was telling me that some lady in his family spends $11 a day at the coffee girls
yeah.
in Nooksack, which is, I have 2 granddaughters working there.
And
And
they
one
both-
granddaughter said in 5 hours, she sold $500 worth of drinks out of that coffee stand. I said, I wouldn't buy 1 drink out of your coffee stand, let alone spend $11 a day. I can live on $11 a day.
Well, there was no social aid,
No,
there was
there
no
wasn't.
government provision, so the money
exactly.
you earned is the money you lived on until the day you died,
Yeah.
so
I do
you
have
had
one.
real incentive.
I have one more story about my grandma.
What's that?
When she was, I don't think she was 5 yet. They were living up on the Breckenridge Road, and my grandpa, her dad had to move up to across the road because he was not doing so well, but they needed a new well. And his cousin was out from Pennsylvania, and he said, "Oh, your daughter can do that." And I don't know how he knew this, but so he made a little stick, and had her walk around,
Oh,
and
water witching.
yeah, water witching, yeah. And she found the well, and he went, "Oh no, she's just doing it." He said, "No, she found it." So they dug 8 feet down, cold, clear water. So she did it. She did it one other time in her life. She said when they were over on Lummi Island for 40 years, because my grandpa had stuff in his lungs, they thought. So he retired at the place on Lummi Island in 1941, which I didn't talk about. And they needed water there, so she walked around until she found a really good spot, and they dug a well there.
Wow, that is an art.
Yeah.
I had a well driller that was drilling for many, many years. Said he would never put his point down until he had witched the place.
Oh, yeah.
You've probably seen it.
Oh, I still don't understand how
I don't know how
that,
it works.
that witch.
I saw a guy do that one time.
Yeah.
I
My
bet-
dad said he could do it too.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. I never even tried it, but I saw a guy do it one time, and I was watching his hands. I wanted to see.
Right, exactly.
And they never moved, but that stick went
That
down.
stick, I know.
You know,
I think it's magnetism.
something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah, I didn't understand it either, but
The water in the willow stick goes down to the water in the
Yeah.
ground. Sure, that's
I don't
easy
know.
to figure out.
who knows?
But there are a lot of well drillers that don't witch, and they end up with more dry holes.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's true.
So,
Well, there was a guy who worked for Everson could do that.
Oh, was there?
We used to work for Everson. Because I saw him one time, he was trying to find a water line.
Oh, yeah, and he was
wasn't
doing,
after well, he was just trying to find a water line.
Isn't that called dousing?
Yeah,
yeah, so the other word for it, yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe whatever dousing means has something to do with what,
Yeah, I don't know.
how it
Yeah, I
works.
don't know.
It must have a physical property that it works.
You would
for.
think so, but I know my grandma and my dad, neither one could wear a watch.
oh, yeah.
Nope,
Huh.
they would just die on them,
Oh, good there.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's,
Magnetic personality.
yeah, apparently, so it's, I mean, we have electricity running through our bodies and stuff,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. I figured that's probably what it was, but I don't know. I've never tried it myself, but I don't have any trouble with watches. Oh, yeah, thank you.
and we think we're smarter than God.
Yeah, yeah.
We think we know more about how to take care of our bodies and stuff than God does.
Yeah.
He built in us such an enormous immune system that
Oh, yeah.
I was reading one story just recently about a doctor who said, we have thousands of cancer cells in our body all the time, and normally our immune system takes care of them all.
Take care of them,
Yeah.
And it says, in order for somebody to develop enough of them in one spot for our system to detect it, there have to be a few billion cells in that one spot. But our body's, meanwhile, taking care of all these others.
But we do so much to compromise our immune system
Exactly.
nowadays.
That's
Yes,
true.
we do.
That's why we
What
have
eat,
more.
yeah.
That's why more of it, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
The only doctors they had were pharmacists. The druggist was the only doctor in town.
Barbers.
And he would,
Yeah, the barber,
he
yeah.
knew how to use drugs,
Was
but,
the dentist.
you know, in those days, morphine was over the counter and heroin was over the
oh,
counter.
yeah.
And so he'd say, oh, go down and get a little heroin, that'd take care of you. Go down to the druggist and he'll give you some heroin or some morphine.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So it's a different world.
Yeah, it is.
I'm not sure I like it. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm at the end, so I don't have much more to go.
I think we're done.
All right,
We're done.
thanks again.
Thank you, Steve. That was very good.